Awesome. Okay. So it should have just told you that we're recording. If you have any issues, let me know.
Yes, you're good.
Brilliant. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us for the fall gardening class. I'm really excited to talk about this. And I always want to say that I feel like the big box stores set us up as new gardeners for failure. Like they put plants out at the wrong time and they just don't give enough guidance. And people will try and fail and they think they're bad gardeners. And I think that usually that's just not the case. I think with a little bit more information and planning and starting in the right season, you can learn to love growing your own food. So a little bit about our farm. We are a small farm in Chesapeake, Virginia. We have just about 5 acres. Our main thing we do is we work with horses. So we're a holistic rehabilitation center for metabolic horses. So we run kind of a specialty facility. But in addition to that, we host classes, both in terms of sustainability. So classes like this on gardening. We also do yoga classes, meditation classes, food prep classes. We do everything from sourdough to how to can jellies and jams, all the way to pressure canning. All sorts of preservation methods. We do sewing classes, so lots of things going on to help people build a more sustainable way of living, living gently on our lands, in our bodies, and in community. So we focus on community sustainability and community connection. So one of the things I talk about a lot is I don't love the term like self-sufficient or like living off of the land. I think that that is unrealistic for one, and I think that it is kind of isolationist on the other. But what I do firmly believe in is community sufficiency. And I think that if we're all kind of working together to build community, and community, we're really lucky to live in this time where community doesn't have to be physical, right? So we can have kind of an online community as well. But when we lean on each other and we help each other out, I think we can do pretty incredible things. So if you don't know me, I'm Kristen, and I got into gardening mostly from environmental concerns is how I started. I started learning about big agriculture and the detriment that it was having on our environment, and perhaps more importantly, as a subset of that, on our soil health. And really started digging into like we couldn't have always been doing it this way, and that's a thing we hear a lot, right? It's like, well, it's always been done this way, but that's really not true. Industrial agriculture has not really been around that long, not until after World War II, and we had a bunch of nitrogen from bombs that we wanted to figure out what to do with, and we realized that we couldn't use it to hyperproduce food. And since then, we've been pumping kind of nitrogen, potassium, and I'm blanking on the other one, NPK, into the garden and into the soil. And what it's doing is actually pulling life out of our soils and turning them into dirt. And there is a huge difference between dirt and soil. Through getting into the environmental impacts and soil erosion and, water impacts that all these herbicides and pesticides, insecticides are having on our land, I also started realizing how we're losing nutrient density in our foods. So one of the ways that plants protect themselves is by phytochemicals, and they pump those out as they are under attack or under stress from either lack of nutrition or pest impacts. And so when we kind of hand feed plants nutrition artificially, and we protect them from all of the pests via chemicals, they actually don't produce those chemicals. And those are the things that actually we take their protections as we eat them and we use them in our own bodies. And so people will say like, oh, tomatoes don't taste the same as they used to, or carrots today don't have the same nutrient density as carrots 100 years ago. And that's absolutely true. And the fact that we kind of baby them is one of the reasons. They're not living in the way that they are designed to live. So that's what got me here was learning how to kind of, again, bring some community sufficiency into my life and try to grow food in a healthier, more sustainable way. Also, food loses nutrient density as it's harvested. So the longer between picking a food and consuming it, we have oxidation and degradation of nutrients throughout that entire process. So the best way to get the most nutrient density is to grow your own food and then eat it immediately from the garden, or prepare it for preservation quickly from that point. That being said, I am absolutely a chaos gardener. And I find that the best way to learn is to try. We joke a lot on our farm that we are a learning farm, and we use that more often. It was obviously one of our mission statements, but we use it more often now when something goes horrifically awry. We're like, well, it's a learning farm. We've learned that that doesn't work. And I want to say that, and I hope that this is true, that if you're listening to this call, that we are in a privileged enough place that at this point in our lives, we are not depending on our gardens for survival, which is a really blessed place to be, because we can experiment with things. And if something goes wrong with our gardens, worst case scenario, we lost, $3 in seeds. But maybe we learned something. And I think that's a really valuable place to be, right? Is where we can experiment and we can learn and grow, and take those lessons to, if we ever do need them in the future. And not to sound scared or anything, but I think being prepared for any inevitable food shortage is a good thing. So one of the things I kind of want to touch on is why are you wanting to do this? And something to reflect on, because what's going to be things that are going to keep you going when the bugs are biting and the weeds are taking over. It's 100 degrees and humid. What keeps you going back to your garden? And I'm going to again circle around that. I feel like that's not the place that you should start. That's why the summer garden is terrible. But if anyone wants to share, if you want to put it in the chat, or if you just kind of want to think about it in your head, either way is fine. But what brings you to a class like this? What is driving you to learn how to grow your own food? And I'll just kind of give you guys a second to either think about it or share. Either way is fine.
So for me, I've been trying a little bit to grow just different things. And I say I have a brown thumb, but I also, like you were saying right now, it's not like I have to be able to grow food or anything like that.
Yeah.
I have a little strawberry patch, and last year I got about 2 gallons of strawberries from it. And this year I got 1, but the squirrels got the other.
Yeah.
And I have a peach tree I've been trying to get, because peaches taste different when they're from the tree than from the store. They're sweeter and all that. And I've been trying to learn how to take care of it. And it's been kind of a challenge as I've dealt with different bugs. And then I've bought predator bugs and all those kinds of things to try and help my little peach tree. But I get about 20 or 30 peaches, which isn't what I need to get. Now the squirrels start on it much sooner than I do, because they don't have to be ripe for the squirrels. The squirrels get probably 100 peaches from the tree.
And always just one bite out of each of them, right?
Sometimes, yeah. It depends if I walk out and catch them in the act, and then they'll drop it and then leave. But sometimes some of them are getting braver and bigger, and they just sit at the top of the tree and look at me and finish eating their dinner, and then they go. My cats try to help. They sit at the bottom of the tree and watch the squirrels. But squirrels are feisty, so they're fine. What else? I have blueberry bushes and I have some raspberry bushes. I tend to like perennial stuff because if you can get it to come back every year.
Yeah.
But whenever I've tried other stuff, like I tried growing carrots, and the carrots were like 1 inch in length and very tiny after I let them grow for like a whole year, and I got like almost nothing out of them. And I thought, well, maybe it's the soil. Maybe I'm not putting stuff down, because I'm just kind of playing around with it. What works, what doesn't, most of the time from seeds. So we'll see. I just love that. Play and try and see what works, what doesn't.
Well, and I think you hit on another really valuable point, and I talk about this a lot too, which is if you're mostly eating grocery store food or even some farmers markets, you probably are not eating ripe produce because it doesn't ship well. It doesn't, stand up well because you said ripe peaches are like, they melt in your hands, they're just like, and they're so juicy and they're so squishy and they're so, so fully good ripe peach is like luxurious. And those don't stand up well on a grocery store shelf,
Yeah, you can't get them from a shelf.
Yeah, because they wouldn't hold up. And same thing with strawberries. It's really rare to get a truly ripe strawberry, which if you've ever bitten into a strawberry, they should be red all the way through. We often see them that they're white, but same thing, they're squishy and they would just never hold up in those little containers for shipping. And I feel like that one of the greatest joys, I don't know if you've experienced this in your garden, is like on a hot day, when the sun's really been on your strawberries, to eat like a warm, really ripe strawberry is like, because the sugars will concentrate in it as heat on. Oh, glorious.
Yes.
I feel like that. And same thing. So, and with tomatoes, again, ripe tomatoes are squishy. And so what they do is they harvest tomatoes before they're ready, and then they flash ripen them with a gas. So they're not going through the normal ripening process. So yeah, awesome. Love it. So as we talked about before, the way that for up until very recent history, we have grown our farms in a very balanced way, where we had all of the animals and we had to depend on soil health, and we were growing all of our vegetables and food and cows and all the things in one space. And it wasn't until I blame a lot on the nitrogen, but really it was the advent of trains that started to piece apart our farms, because it became advantageous to specialize. So now we could truck things, we could, train things long distances. We weren't just in our communities. And then that allowed for us the mechanization allowed for us to start getting specialized equipment for harvesting and all that sort of stuff. So we started to step away from a community-based agriculture where we were growing everything in one system. So now we had chicken plants and we had dairy farms and we had corn farms and we had, and everything was separate. And, I think that sometimes we forget that we are nature. People are like, oh, I like to spend time in nature, I like to visit nature. We are animals, we exist inside this ecosystem. And plants and animals are designed to coexist in an ecosystem as well. And so then we have to start putting things in to replace the species that we have taken out. So, now we have harrows to come in, but, who used to be our harrows were chickens. They would scratch through everything, and now we bring in the aerators, but like goats were aerators with their little pointy hooves. As they walked through stuff, they would aerate, the worms would aerate, but we've killed all of that and we pulled it all out of the system. And now we're like mechanically adding it back in or doing it separately. So on our farm, we tried to mimic nature as much as possible. And so things like not tilling the soil and taking the time to grow good soil biology. There's a ton of life in soil, good, healthy soil from, nematodes and worms and all of that kind of stuff. So, and when we start putting herbicides and pesticides and that, we kill all that. And same thing, I think that I come at it, my vision for my garden is I want to create an ecosystem. And if I get strawberries from it, all the better, right? I think that's a nice mindset. And again, we're not dependent on our gardens, and I hope that no one here is. But we talk about the squirrels getting some of our harvest. Like, what do you do to protect the squirrels? And to protecting against squirrels, I'm like, my answer is plant more peach trees. So I look to have abundance, and I did actually have a friend who came out to the farm during mulberry season. We have mulberry trees, and we were eating handfuls and handfuls off of this mulberry tree, right? As we had left the yoga studio and we're just like stuffing our faces with mulberries. And she said, is this what abundance feels like? She was like, we couldn't possibly eat all of these berries. And she's like, and this is just one tree and you have 5 or 6 trees, And I think that, yeah, when we grow with nature, when we're growing with seasons, we have abundance and abundance. You can't have perfection and abundance in the same space, right? Abundance has to be messy and a little bit chaotic and free. And then later she said, "Is this what it feels like to be a bear?" I was like, yeah, we were just supposed to exist in these systems where food was just all around us. And so I think that's something that has like really kind of inspired me. So yeah, so we try to grow in systems and guilds, and I do grow right now in raised beds, which I think is a really great place for other people to start. And you can start in raised beds, or you can start in pots if you're in an apartment. So you don't have to have acres and acres. We are building out our food forest now. We've been on our land about a year. But raised beds are a nice place to start. But I personally believe in planting really densely, because how often do you see in nature like one plant and then a lot of land and then like one plant? Like that never happens, right? Plants are designed to work together and work in community. And if you plan your garden well, you can get a lot of food in a very small space. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of like stacking plants together and what works really well. But oh, and real quick about we don't use any insecticides. And I think what people don't realize perhaps is that we don't have, I'll say many, so I don't want to speak incorrectly to say any, but we don't have very many specific insecticides. So most insecticides are going to be broad spectrum, meaning they're going to kill everything that they touch, even organic ones. So we'll often see things like neem oil or BT powder or diatomaceous earth talked about in organic groups, but they will kill everything. They are not specific. So they're going to kill your aphids. They're also going to kill your ladybugs that would have eaten the aphids. They're going to kill the praying mantises. They're going to kill the soldier beetles. They're going to kill the wasps. They're going to kill everything. And what I have learned through this process of observation of nature is that things tend to come into balance. It might take some time and you might experience some loss, especially if you've been in an area that has been very heavily managed, but things tend to come into balance. And so now I take a deep breath every time I see a pest coming into my, garden. So if I see aphids, I'm like, I'm gonna notice there's aphids in the garden. I'm gonna sit with that for a minute. I'm like, let's just see what happens.
Do you ever just pull them off or wash them off the plant to try and, without killing everything, but maybe just aphids? Or do you ever buy the predator insects at all?
I haven't, because some of them are invasive. So some of the ladybugs is a big one that they put out might not be our native ladybugs. I don't want to outcompete our native species, because a lot of times the ones that they're selling are again not native and therefore aggressive, because they want to use the most voracious predators they can find, but then they outcompete for their species. But yes, I will use manual removal. I often use manual removal of like tomato hornworms. Tomato hornworms, by the way, which will absolutely decimate your tomato crop, like overnight. They are voracious. They are incredible little caterpillars. They turn into absolutely glorious moths. They look like little hummingbirds. They turn into sphinx moths, which are very pretty, and they are excellent pollinators. So, and they are native here. So they are not ideal in our systems, but they do serve a purpose. And as with most insects that are around, right? So what I will often do is, number one, I'm not gonna lie, I feed them to my chickens sometimes. They're really high in protein. But I will also, we have native but not desirable nightshades. So anything in that family, the nightshade family, we have native plants, and they are toxic to horses. And so I don't really want them on my pasture. So what I'll do is I'll take those little moths or those little caterpillars and I'll pull them off, and then I will go put them on those plants, and they can go eat those plants to their heart's content. They're on a species specific plant and they will eat those. They eat plants of the nightshade family. They are happy. They're taking care of a problem, and they get to go be pollinators, and my tomatoes are safe. So yes, manual removal is a good option. But what I find often is that, within a couple of, days or weeks that the predators come in, and that's how the food systems work, right? So like the lower on the food chain you are, the more prolific you tend to be, right? So like mice and bunnies have lots of babies, whereas, hawks and things have only a few, right? And we talk about poisoning. So like, oh, there's mice in my garden or whatever. So we poison the mouse. If that mouse then takes out a hawk, well, now your mouse population is going to explode, right? Because you just took out one of your predators who would have eaten several of these. And talk about dragonflies. So your spray for mosquitoes, where one mosquito eats hundreds of dragonflies a day, you knock out the mosquitoes, you knock out the dragonflies, those mosquitoes rebound a lot faster. And now it takes a long time for these predators to catch up. So you can tend to make the system, when you break the system, the flywheel breaks, and now you're chasing it all the time. And then you have to manage it. And so I always look at, whenever I see these other animals in my garden, my ecosystem here, I'm like, my coworkers, thank you for your assistance here. I'm so glad to see you. You know, and like, you're doing your job, and I'm so grateful that you're here. You know, anything I can do to assist. Same thing. And I think some of the insects that we get kind of scared by, so spiders are another one that we tend to have a visceral reaction to as humans, but most of the spiders here in Virginia are like absolutely on our side and are trying to eat the mosquitoes, trying to do all the like good stuff. And so we have garden spiders, which are big and scary. They're like, you know, yay big. And they hang out and they eat bugs, and they're super cool. And one of the things I love about them so much is if you start to get close to them, and which happens because they're in between plants, you know, you don't really see them all the time. They will bounce their webs at you like, hey, like, don't run into me. And I'm like, I appreciate you. I see you. I don't want to run into you. Which is just really cool that they like kind of alert you to them that way.
I know.
Spiders that do that. Yeah.
I know one year, the peaches, my peach tree did very poorly, and I found there were a lot of worms in them and various other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, oh, I'll just buy this pesticide, because I've been told you have to use a lot of pesticides with peach trees to really get them to work. So I did that. What I didn't realize is my timing was off, and I killed a lot of the good bugs that eat the bad bugs. And the bad bugs that were causing the most harm had already dug under the bark at that time, and they were nice and safe. So then the following year, I almost lost the peach tree because of that. And then I started reading, well, if you spray at the wrong time, you could do this or that. And I decided I didn't know enough to use pesticides, so I gave up on that. And then I bought predator bugs that were specific to the worms that, does that make sense? So and then I was reading about the ladybugs, and of course, right after I bought some just down the road, I read this one place that I go to that I got the predator bugs. They said they no longer sold ladybugs for various reasons. And one of them was also that they weren't sustainable, that people who sell ladybugs, they just go out and harvest them in the wild in one ecosystem. And then they get planted in another, and it may not be the right ecosystem for them. And it may not even just be what you're talking about. So then one area loses all of its good ladybugs that it needs, and they don't get back to where they belong, so to speak. So that's what they were saying too, in addition to what you are saying.
Yep. That is absolutely a problem. They wild harvest. And I think that's the thing too, is that like, I try to view it as, if you build it, they will come sort of situation, you know? And again, some of the times, and perennials are a little bit different because we have pretty limited control over, you know, what they're doing once they're established. And again, I'm a big fan of perennials. But sometimes we can avoid some insect pressure by when we plant, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And again, so like squash bugs are a real big problem in our area and most of the South. So growing things like specifically the long-term, your winter squashes are hard because they take a long time to mature. So our summer squashes are like zucchini and yellow squash and patty pan and those kind of guys. And we eat them young and fresh, so we can crank through a lot of them. So we usually, you know, everyone has zucchini to give away, right? Because but our winter squashes, and I just want to make this quick clarification, is that winter squashes are still grown in the summer. Sometimes people think that you can start planting pumpkins and things in the fall, and that's not true. They grow in the summer. They are frost tender plants, but we allow them to get to full maturity, which puts a nice hard shell on them, and then we can store them for the winter. So then they become winter squashes. So you can, you know, store your butternuts, your pumpkins, acorn squash, all those kind of guys, and eat them all fall and winter. And then by the time we're coming back around to spring and summer, now we're back to zucchini, yellow squash, and patty pans. But yeah, so I have found that planting them later and using a small variety. I use I think I have the seeds here, a honey nut squash. Do I have them? No. Which is a like 4-inch kind of personal sized butternut squash. So they're about yay big. I can get those to mature without them being decimated by squash vine borers and the squash bugs. So sometimes the variety can help. And that's where growing from seed can be so helpful, because you can get varieties that are local to your region and have, or like, have been grown in your region for a long time and are adapted to your region. You can get smaller varieties, you can get, cold hardy varieties, you can, so you can pick and choose and get a lot more diversity than you could if you were just buying either started plants from Lowe's or, obviously buying from the grocery store. You're really limited. I think that's one of the coolest things about growing your own food is you can get really, like, there's so many radishes. There's like 200 types of radishes, like some people are like, I don't like radishes. I'm like, how could you know that? You haven't tried them all. Maybe you really love some of them. So yeah. Okay. So a couple of things I want to talk about to set, yourself up for success is I feel like sometimes people go like really big on their first garden, and gardening can be really overwhelming. And especially again in the summer when things are like really hopping, and now all of a sudden we have, 200 pounds of tomatoes, and if you like just had a small, set out, a handful of plants, and you can get that many off of like 4 or 5 tomato plants, right? Like you can be overwhelmed. Some people are like, I started 100 tomato seedlings. And it's like, oh, you'll never recover. So yeah, so start small, right? Like you probably only need like 1 or 2 of most plants when you're starting out, and grow things that you'll actually eat, or you're at least willing to try. If you hate rutabagas, don't grow them. I think people will do a lot with that, with like I was saying here, like kale. I highly recommend trying new things, but try 1 or 2. Don't go crazy, and especially if you're starting from seeds, right? Because you get like 500 of them and you get big trays, and so you're like, well, I started 100 kale plants. Probably don't need that many. They're kind of hard to kill, and you will end up with more kale than you know what to do with it. And you can only eat kale chips so many times. And then plan for your life. One thing I'd like to talk about is like a lot of people will come to gardening classes because they're trying to get away from processed foods. And I was like, here's the problem with growing your own food is you have to process it. But like, you're not really growing food, you're growing ingredients. And if you don't cook from scratch a lot, keep that in mind, because then you're going to end up with things you have to do things with, which means if you're working 60 hours a week and taking care of 3 small children, like that might not be feasible. If you want to start, perhaps your motivation is to lighten some of the load on your groceries, or, just bring more fresh cooking into your environment, or into your environment. I work with horses a lot, into your home. But you're not really ready to like make tomato sauce from scratch. I really recommend starting with herbs, where you can quickly add fresh herbs to something, right? They're quick, they're easy to use, they're expensive in the grocery store. You can grow a lot of them perennially, and you like know what to do with them without having to do a lot of like canning and freezing and dehydration and like all this stuff, like once you have a lot of it. So again, starting small, growing foods you'll like with a couple of experiments, and then plan for your lifestyle, because if you don't have time to be putting up 100 pounds of tomatoes, then maybe skip them this year. Cool. Comments, questions, concerns?
Nope.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about some common mistakes that I see. Number one, I said in the beginning, I think that big box stores, so Lowe's, Home Depot, those kind of guys, Tractor Supply, they put out plants at the wrong time of year. They're putting out plants nationally, and we're in a unique region, right? Everyone is in their own unique region where your seasons happen differently. And I see a lot of times that they will put out things like Brussels sprouts in our region in, March, April. And I'm like, yeah, ain't no way. Our springs are very short. We get hot very quickly, right? So we stay cool for a long time. And then once we start to warm up past our frost dates to when it gets to 85 degrees is really short. And all of our brassicas, so broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, that whole kind of family does not tolerate temperatures over 85 degrees. Okay. So it's really hard for us to start those in spring and get them harvested before it gets too hot, which is why fall is a lovely time to grow those. The nice thing about us is that we have a nice long fall, usually, right? We have a really long growing season for the summer. And so we can often miss. I did not plant an early summer garden this year. My life was chaos and it just didn't happen. I started my tomato plants from seed in late July. I'm harvesting tomatoes. I harvested a bunch of cucumbers. I have a ton of peppers. Like our growing season is so long, we will probably be harvesting into November. So you can skip a lot of those bugs and stress and all of that stuff and weeds. And people are like, oh my gosh, your like tomato plants look amazing. Like, yeah, I know they're not very old. Like, you know.
Okay.
And so one thing is we take advantage of your seasons. Also, if you are committed to a summer garden, which again, I don't recommend early on, we get 2 shots at our summer garden. So you can start seeds in end of April, beginning of May, and have plants in. Start your seeds again in late June, early July. Pull out everything that is old and dying and moldy and musty and, struggling because it's 110 degrees, and then put new plants back in, nice young fresh ones, and then harvest those in the late summer and going into fall. So we get 2 shots at them, which is lovely. Also, we get really hot in our region and we get really humid. It is a tough region to grow in. Very few plants like anything over 95 degrees. Tomatoes stop setting fruit at 90 degrees, 95 degrees. They get really sad. They start curling up their leaves. They don't like it. And we tell everyone to plant your tomatoes in full sun. Well, don't, because not here. They would love some afternoon shade if you can give it to them. And again, they don't love high humidity. They get mildewy and stuff. So anyway, just making sure we're planting our plants in the correct season, correct temperatures. We're mindful of temperatures, I think, is a big thing. The only plants that I have come across that really like Virginia summers are eggplants and okra. If you don't have 2 plants, you're not producing a whole lot in the peak of summer. Yeah. So we have, like I said, we have a lovely time right now. Our sugar snap peas are going to do way better if we plant them now. They get hard and weird if we plant them in the spring. We get like a short window on them in the spring. Carrots, we're never going to grow carrots in the spring. If you think you can't grow carrots, probably because you're growing them in the wrong season. We're only going to get the chance of carrots, which I will also say carrots are very hard. They're not a beginner vegetable. Yeah. And then our frost tender plants. So again, people misconstrue winter squash a lot, and we'll try to plant winter squash. We think pumpkins in fall, and so we're gonna I'm gonna put my pumpkins out in the fall. No, they'll die. They're frost tender. So we have frost hardy plants and we have frost tender plants, so plants that will die. Frost is considered 40 degrees. So things that will die under 40 degrees and things that do really well. And one of the neat things about growing in the fall and winter, we have pretty mild winters here, and we can keep kale and stuff growing all winter. So you can be eating nice, fresh, vitamin C rich greens pretty much all winter here. It's very rare that we'll get a killing frost that will kill our brassicas. And a lot of our root vegetables, again, we can grow them all winter, and we can store them in the ground, which is really nice. So rutabagas, turnips, things like that. Cool. Questions on temperatures?
No, I bought these little like plastic bells to put over stuff to protect them from frost.
Yep.
And they're pretty inexpensive, so I'm gonna try them out.
Yeah, and so we have ways to kind of do like season extensions on both sides. Again, things like shade cloth can extend our growing season in the summer, right? So we can kind of take some of the sun off of them. Or most people are worried about winter, right? And you can cover them. You can also, a sheet will work. If you like are trying to eke out the last little bits of like tomatoes or green beans or something like that, and you're like, oh no, it got a little cold and I wasn't expecting it. Do a sheet on them. The other thing that people will do that works is a battery powered Christmas lights under a sheet will provide just enough warmth. You know, if you're like flirting with that, like, you know, it's going to be 40 degrees, it's going to be, you know, 39 degrees for like 2 hours there right at sunrise, you know, like you can probably eke it out that way and protect them. Planting the wrong spacing can also cause problems. So mostly on our seed packets, it'll say, so here, I don't know if you're going to be able to see these. I have a picture later on, but we have our little seed packets. On the back, it usually somewhere on it will have some information on it. So this one has how long it takes to sprout, the ideal temperature in which it grows, how deep to plant the seeds, and how far apart, and whether or not they're frost hardy. Okay, so these are this little package of radishes. So it says its ideal temperature here is 50 to 75 degrees. So we're still a little bit warm for these, right? They want to be spaced about 4 inches apart, and they are frost hardy. So if I plant these in another couple weeks, we should be good to grow them most of the winter, and they're going to produce most of their growth in spring and fall, right? So they're going to be peak production, ideal temperatures around the 50s, which we get twice a year. That being said, play with your spacing. One caveat I'll make to that is know how big your plants are going to get when they're full grown. Because I was mind blown by how big cabbages are. And I planted a lot of cabbages in a very small space, and I did not realize that they were like this big. I misjudged. I was like, I did not plan well for this. Which again, where's that experiment thing is good. But usually what happens if you plant your plants too close together and they're all the same plant competing for the same space, which we'll cover a little bit more about that later, they will just be smaller. You know, so that's how you get microgreens. They just plant a bunch of like alfalfa really tight together and like let it sprout and then harvest it, you know, so they keep them all nice and small, which is totally an option. You can do that if you're going to harvest the plants small. So you're going to harvest baby spinach. You're not going to grow them into full plants. Plant them nice and close together, you know, and then they'll stay small and you can just harvest the baby leaves off of them. Another thing is that the way we're eating food. So in the summer, how plants work is that their main point is to reproduce. And they do that usually through their fruits. And in the summer, we are primarily eating the fruits of plants. Okay, usually the immature fruits of plants. And so the more that you pick plants during the summer, the more you harvest green beans, the quicker you are to take off your cucumbers, the quicker you are to take off your tomatoes, the more fruit they will produce because they are trying to get their seeds out into the world. Okay, so in the summer, we eat mostly fruits. In the winter, the plants that stay alive during the winter, what they do is they stop their food production, their fruit production. They're going into, you know, putting forth their seeds into the world, and they go to staying alive. And so what they do is that they pull in all of their sugars and their resources into their leaves and into their roots to protect themselves against the frost. So sugar is nature's antifreeze, and it keeps them safe and allows them to kind of find protection against the winter weather. So if you don't like things like kale, as an example, or maybe some carrots, chances are you had them grown in hot weather where they're kind of bitter because they're in seed production mode. They're in flower and seed production mode. And the last thing they want to do is be eaten during this phase. And so they actually put out bitter compounds to kind of self-protect. Whereas in the winter, specifically after a frost, they tend to get very sweet. So we eat leaves and roots in the fall and winter, and we eat fruits and flowers in the spring and summer. Yeah, so carrots in particular are best if they have experienced a frost. All of your root vegetables, beets, turnips, rutabagas, all those kinds of guys. They develop all the sugars in their roots after a frost, so they're going to be much better. Also looking at your time to harvest. So things like green beans have an actual pretty quick time to harvest. So does it say on this one? It doesn't, but I just happen to know that these are green beans, and they're about 90 days from sprout to harvest. And so back a couple weeks ago, we had about 100 days left of frost-free weather, guessing. And so I was able to eke out another round of these. There's lots of things that are kind of quick producers like this. Peas are another one. I mean, peas tend to be frost hardy, but peas, zucchini, you can usually crank out another round of zucchini here at the end of the season. And again, using some season extension opportunities, you can probably get a good second harvest, leading right up into like Thanksgiving, which is when we start to get really cold, usually, depending on the weather. Oh, one thing of note is it often will tell you time to harvest on things. That is for spring. So once we hit our equinox, things start to, once we hit a solstice, things start to slow down, right? We're starting to get less light during the day. And it will take longer for things to reach maturity at that point. But just tack on another, I don't know, 10 days or so, and you'll usually get pretty close. So yeah, we'll sneak another round. We talked about this. And again, we did talk about the fall and spring. Fall in particular tends to be an easier time to garden because the weed pressure is a whole lot lower. The pest pressure is a whole lot lower. It is also not, hot and humid. And so it's like pleasant to actually be out in your garden. Things grow slower. If you've ever hit the August garden, it's overwhelming, and you just can't keep on top of it. There's just tomatoes growing everywhere and you just can't manage unless you're truly in love with the whole process. It's an easy time to be I am not doing this. And like I was saying, summer is just hard, and even tomatoes think it's too hot. So this is the reading a seed packet, and like I said, I always recommend that the very first time you try something, so if it's your first time growing cabbage, if it's your first time growing bok choy, if it's your first time growing, winter squash, go ahead and follow the packet. So this, you can see it's an annual. It tells you your planting depth. Another problem people often have when they're planting new seeds is they plant them way too deep. We kind of envision here's the soil and here's our seed. Most things are a quarter of an inch. A good rule of thumb is twice as deep as the seed is wide. So you look at really tiny things brassicas. I mean, they're itty bitty little things, and so they just really need to be you just boop, 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 soil and just drop it in and just barely cover it, and that's all it needs. So it says to go ahead and plant them pretty generously and then thin them to 6 inches apart. This is a zinnia. Tells you how tall it gets, how long it takes to germinate, and when to plant it. And again, use this with the kind of keep in mind that this has some seasonal variation, or both seasonal variation and location. And they're usually talking about spring, but most of these plants you can get a second round of in the fall. So this one says direct sow after danger of first frost. Does this tell us? It doesn't tell us our ideal growing temperature here. And then bloom summer to fall. So this is something, again, so it says after danger of first frost, you could plant them probably now. I would try it, and this is a nice thing I think about with growing things. Again, assuming we're speaking from this privileged place, worst case scenario, you don't get zinnias. Best case scenario, you do, so maybe you lose 30 cents in seeds, but on the plus side, zinnias. So yeah, highly recommend starting with what it says and then start experimenting. What happens if I plant them in August? What happens if I plant them in November? What happens if we have a really, long fall and we don't get our frost until Christmas, which I have seen since I've been here, so I feel throw caution to the wind a little bit. We are in hardiness zone. Well, this says 7B. It actually changed. We're in 8A in my region currently. So the Hampton Roads area is 7B, 8A, depending on where exactly you are. And it puts our first killing frost at November 1st, November 10th. I've seen it really go as far as Thanksgiving weekend without one, but it's variable. I've seen it also as early as like Halloween time. So we're kind of gambling. And I feel like one of the best things about gardening is the ability to like kind of surrender control to nature. Just say, well, we did what we could do. And it's in God's hands now. But this is a planting chart. And you can see the purple is when to plant and the green is when you're harvesting those. And you can see that a lot of our kind of cooler weather collards, onions, peas, radishes, turnips, spinach, potatoes, beets, cabbage, carrots, lettuce. We get 2 good rounds of those, cauliflower, some beans, where we get to plant them in March and April, and then we also plant them in August and September. Cool. So we get 2 full rounds. And then a lot of those upper ones, we will harvest where you see the little arrows there that we're harvesting those all winter long. So you can have nice fresh food all winter. In our region, we're really, really lucky that way. Oh, another thing is that some foods that we like associate with certain seasons are actually inaccurate. One that drives me absolutely crazy is that cilantro does not grow during salsa season. So you're not getting cilantro and tomatoes at the same time, which is deeply disappointing in my world. Cilantro is very quick to bolt and does not like the heat at all. It goes into, luckily, a very pretty flower. And then if you harvest the seeds, it becomes coriander. So it is a useful plant all season long, but you're not getting the leaves for your salsas or your guacamoles in the middle of summer, which sucks. Another thing that falls into that category for us is lettuce. So summer salads or like lettuce for your burgers is really tough because unless you're providing some sort of decent shade for those guys, you probably are not getting nice, crunchy, non-bitter lettuce in the summer. Any questions about what does or does not grow in different seasons for us?
Could you put the link for this in the chat somewhere?
I will have to find it, but yes, I could provide it for sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. All right. This was a planting calendar. Oh, I was gonna say you can, oh, my link didn't work here, but I have a thing where you can find your planting dates by your zip code by going to the almanac. So it's almanac.com/planting dates, and you can pull it in. And it's like, oh, look at me, I did like it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then you can pull. And again, knowing that it is a guess, you know, because we don't know what nature's going to do. So like Elaine was saying, I highly recommend if you're starting out to think perennial because you don't have to plant it every year. So number 1, that saves money. Number 2, it helps your soil because you're keeping plants in your soil. One of the biggest components to good and healthy soil is keeping living things in it all year round and keeping it covered. So cover your soil and keep things growing in it. Good healthy soil, lots of microbiome activity. We have a lot of perennial fruits, which Elaine mentioned in earlier, some of my absolute favorites. So blackberries and raspberries are both native to Virginia. Obviously, we have wild types and we have cultivated types, right? So we've cultivated them into different varieties. But they both grow really well here, almost too well here. Like plant a blackberry once and you can't kill it. So I left my old farm and I had planted several blackberry bushes and raspberry bushes, and the barn owner was like, I feel so bad, the new tenants killed your blackberry bushes. I'm like, no, they didn't. They'll be back, don't worry about it. They do have thornless varieties of both sets of plants, of both blackberries and raspberries. Our native raspberry is the black raspberry, which I highly recommend you trying if you haven't had the pleasure of eating one of our native black raspberries. I recommend. They're really small because again, native fruits tend to be smaller than we tend to cultivate them for size, right, and other things. So Our native blackberries also tend to be on a little bit on the smaller size, but they have lots of varieties and thornless ones and things like that. Blackberries also turn a gorgeous color in the fall. I don't know if you've experienced, Elaine, but especially our native blackberries turn a gorgeous purple. Their leaves turn purple in the fall. Blueberries, if you don't know, again, native to Virginia, and their foliage in the fall is a brilliant red, stunning plant. They get about 6 feet tall in the right conditions. The high bush blueberry, who is one of our native blueberries, again, small berries because it's our native plant, does the best in some shade, but they also do really well in boggy areas. So if you have a wet area of your yard, blueberries are a really nice plant to put there. We also have native passion fruit, which, if you, again, have not had the pleasure, they taste like red starburst. Which is crazy. They're very tropical. Their flowers, I really should put one in the slideshow, but they have really tropical, alien-looking flowers, gorgeous purple flowers that look like something out of Star Trek. And then they put out little fruits, and you pop the fruits open when they're ripe. They will drop to the ground, and you can harvest them right as they fall. And pop them open. They're full of these like really like gelatinous seeds. The seeds are edible. You just like pop the whole thing, the whole gelatinous mess into your mouth, and it tastes like the sweetest candy. It's amazing. And the fact these are just like native plants to Virginia is just always blows my mind. We have a ton of them on our farm. If you're local, I recommend you come out and try some. They're starting to ripen right now. We also, they're a vine, and they like another one kind of like raspberries. Like once you get them going, you're never getting rid of them. So I hope you really like passion fruit. We also have native pawpaws, which if you've, again, never had, I highly recommend. They grow on really pretty trees, and they have gorgeous deep red flowers. People say that they smell like rotting flesh, that the flowers do. They're pollinated by flies, which is why they smell weird, but they're really pretty. And they are kind of custardy mango banana tropical situation, kind of like papayas, but small like here. So yeah, so think about some native plants. Obviously, if you're growing something native, it tends to grow well here, and it takes a lot less input into the system. So in addition to blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, also native to Virginia, tend to do really well. I recommend covering them with something if you're hoping, like Elaine mentioned, to actually eat any of them, because they're prized in the animal community as well. And then I recommend starting, like I mentioned, with herbs. If you're looking to start herbs right now, some gorgeous ones that are winter hardy as long as they have been conditioned to be so, right? They've acclimated. Rosemary, gorgeous pretty bush, sage, oregano, and thyme will all grow all winter long, and you can harvest them and add them to your, basically think of like Thanksgiving spices, right? Your Thanksgiving herbs. Yeah, they're going to grow all year, so, or all winter. They do really well, and you can have fresh herbs added to all of your food. I also really love low effort plants that you can kind of just put in the ground and then not think about them again until you harvest them. I think it's an awesome way to get people started gardening. And it feels very farmer-like to harvest potatoes and onions. Like you feel like you have done something when you were like making a stew with like potatoes and onions that you grew, and garlic. I didn't grab my garlic, but garlic is probably my very favorite thing for people to start with. You can plant a lot of it and probably set yourself up for garlic for the entire year very quickly, very cheaply, and very easily. The kind of saying on these are that you plant them on Halloween and you'll harvest them on 4th of July. But between that time, you get to ignore them, which is lovely. They're super easy to plant. If you get organic clothes from the grocery store, you can absolutely plant those. The reason I say organic is that the conventionally grown ones are often sprayed with a substance that inhibits sprouting, so that they store longer in the grocery store without sprouting, or in your pantry. But if you're in your kitchen and you see garlic that has sprouted, just plop those suckers in the ground, and then each little clove of garlic, you'll plant it with the pointy side up, kind of, again, just about as twice as deep as it is tall. So plant it in the ground. And then leave it alone. It'll put up leaves. There's two varieties of garlic. There's hardneck and softneck varieties that depend on where your growing region is. We are super lucky. We're in a transitional zone, so it doesn't matter. And I don't remember which one's which because it doesn't matter for us. We can plant both varieties and both will be fine. But the hardneck variety will put up what's called a garlic scape. A couple of weeks before they're ready to be harvested, they put up a flower, basically. You can harvest that, know that your garlic's gonna be ready soon. You can chop that up, use it in salads, use it in pestos. You can pickle it. It's amazing. So added bonus on the hardneck varieties for that. But yeah, so you're just gonna put them in the ground. The other thing you can do is you can harvest them early for spring garlic, which looks more oniony. They haven't cloved out all the way. So each clove you plant becomes a bulb. So you need to plant them about garlic bulb sized apart. And yeah, and so spring garlic has not bulbed out yet. So it's like an onion about yay big. It's nice and light. It hasn't fully developed its like full garlicness yet. And so kind of a hack, if you want to call it that, is to plant like 3 rows of garlic. And then in spring, harvest the middle row and then put your tomato plants where you harvested them while they're nice and small. By the time your plants are getting big, you can pull the garlic on the sides. And allegedly it helps with some pest control.
I've heard that.
Yeah. So some pests, well, a lot of pests actually locate food sources by smell. And so there's a theory that if you plant really smelly things in with your, target plants that you're trying to protect, so onions, garlic, basil, cilantro, those really aromatic things, they're called aromatic confusers. And they make your plants harder to find as your insects are kind of looking for marigolds are another one. They have like a really strong smelling oil in them. So they don't necessarily do anything to protect your plants in terms of people talk about companion planting. So it doesn't do anything like that, but it does actually make your plants kind of harder to locate. Yeah. Onions, same thing. You can plant them kind of early days. They will overwinter. You can also plant them in the spring. Potatoes are frost tender. We're probably too late for potatoes now. Again, depending on how things look, we might be able to eke in maybe some new potatoes, the baby potatoes. One cool thing about potatoes is that you can harvest them as new potatoes early and then leave some in the ground. So as you want to make a potato salad, just go through and pick up a couple from each plant, leave the rest in the ground, and then it will get bigger.
Do you have a certain variety of potatoes you recommend?
I do red potatoes and Yukon Golds here. Again, I go for smaller varieties just because I've had better luck trying to get them out the door. But Norfolk Feed and Seed sells seed potatoes in the spring. And basically you can start putting potatoes in the ground. We never get a big hard freeze here, where our soil freezes for the most part. The rule of thumb there is to plant them on St. Patrick's Day. So yeah, but yeah, so you can harvest them kind of as needed. You don't need to take up the whole plant, but your potatoes will be done and ready when the plant dies. Same thing with garlic and onions. So once the leaves die, your plants are ready. But the nice thing about potatoes is you can harvest them and leave them in the ground and they will keep growing. And just take what you need.
Something one of my neighbors said about onions is that the green onions, if you only use the tops of them, you can replant the bottoms, which I did, I guess about 2 years ago. And I planted them and I had them summer and winter, the tops. Whenever I needed a green onion, I would just go out and cut off the top. Now they did get a little woody as time went on, as they got older. And then eventually my pot broke. I replanted them and they did not survive that replanting, or at least where I planted them must not have been a good spot. But they did well in a pot when I just stuck the pot outside, had it on the rail of our porch, and they lasted about 2 years from one thing, a bunch of green onions that I bought and only used the tops on. I thought that was kind of cool. Oh well, just putting out there.
Oh, I'm back. they're biennial, so they will bulb 1 year and then flower the next year. And my dad's joining. Yeah, so they will bulb 1 year and then flower the next year. And then you can, once they flower, if you don't catch them in time and they flower and they go to seed, now you have onions. If you miss them and then they you know, and there's several varieties. Radishes are one that I love that people start with because, again, it's hard to mess up radishes, meaning that once they sprout and become radishes, awesome. Use them as radishes, eat the greens, right? You can do both. They're like peppery. I recommend putting them into like a pesto or something like that because they're kind of fuzzy, or cooking them. You can cook them like turnip greens or anything like that. If you miss some, you just get overwhelmed. They will flower, which are pretty. They have pretty little purple flowers, purple and white flowers. If once that happens, they will produce little seed pods, little green pods that are awesome. Again, pickled in salads. They are peppery kind of and crunchy. Super cool. You can eat them fresh. You can stir fry them. You can do all sorts of cool things with them. If you miss them again and they dry out on the plant, well, now you just have radish seeds. So it's like you just won again. Like, it's cool. Like, you can't mess up. They just create more food. And we mentioned that cilantro is one that's kind of similar in that if you miss it and it bolts, which it goes to flower, you have gorgeous flowers, really pretty umbral flowers. And then if you leave them on the vine, on the plant, they will turn into coriander seeds. Then you harvest those, and now you have spices for dishes in the winter months or whatever. So pretty cool. Leafy greens, again, just real quick, you can cut and come again, right? So you can just take off leaves. Don't kill the whole plant at once. They will continue to regrow. Sometimes in some varieties of my like Siberian kale, you can't kill it. And even when you hack the whole thing off, it comes back. So you can like literally eat off of the same plant all winter. Root vegetables are really cool because you can actually just leave them in the ground and only take them out when you need them. So you don't need to store them. You don't need to worry about curing them. They just hang out, and you can walk out to your garden and pull the beets you want and leave the rest of them in the ground, which is awesome. So, and they actually taste better when you leave them that way. We talked about our native plant friends. Here's a quick list. Spicebush is like more of an herb-based, or service berries, walnuts, pecans, persimmons, another one I forgot, and elderflowers. And elderberries are native to Virginia. We can talk about, we can overwinter things. We can actually grow lots of cool tropical things. We put them in pots and bring them in. Some of the main ones are ginger and turmeric, which is pretty cool to have on hand. And you can just take the root, then you can pull off what you want, plant it back on the ground, keep it growing, and kind of always have it available to you, which is pretty cool. Turmeric works the same way. So yeah, I was gonna say, if you're gonna like do something today, after leaving this class, I would say plant onions and garlic, plant some sage and rosemary, and plant a blackberry bush. And then by next summer, you're going to have so much amazing food. Yeah. So if you're just starting out and you have a small space, that would kind of be my recommendation. Just really quick, obviously making sure we're always planting for pollinators too, because without pollinators, we have no food. So plant something in your garden that is lovely and keeps you going back there and keeps the bugs coming. So we have some lovely ones. We have like yarrow is a good one. We have marigolds. If you're going on the native side, we have these tick seeds, bee balm, columbine. This is actually chicory that little bee is on. But yeah, making sure that we're having something growing and blooming as often as we can in the garden, and making it a beautiful place to be. Because, I mean, the best, this is something that Jess Stoward says, is that the greatest cure for the garden is the gardener. So being out in it and making it a nice, enjoyable place to spend time, to have your morning coffee, to spend some time in nature. If you're out there, you're going to tend to it, you're going to fall in love with it, you're going to care for it. And that's the kind of the magic sauce there. As I mentioned, we have lots of other classes. We have permaculture classes, canning, more talking about bugs and things, helping people identify the garden friends that they get to share their gardens with, is how I always look at it. I call them my coworkers, like I said, on the farm. This little guy is super cool over here. He's a goldenrod soldier beetle. He eats bad guys. um, and it's like how happy he is. But yeah, so love to hear from more people in more classes. We will do a seed starting class in the spring for those who are committed to growing a summer garden. But yeah, any kind of questions or anything before we wrap up?
Do you have any favorite plants that you like to have around to help promote your beneficial insects or your predator insects?
Yeah. So that little friendly guy that we were just showing here, he is a goldenrod soldier beetle. And one of my absolute favorite native plants is goldenrod. It's in the Solidago family. We have lots of varieties of goldenrod in Virginia. So you can kind of like pick your poison on which one you like. There's like really tall ones, there's some shorter ones. We have one called showy goldenrod. They produce yellow flowers right around this time of year when a lot of things are starting to kind of die back, especially. It's like a good late season supporter. And like I said, he is a beneficial insect who will definitely help protect your garden. And he requires goldenrod as a host plant. Oh, I didn't give my PSA on this. Ever since I taught this class the very first time, we were talking about beneficial insects, and someone said that, you know, I planted milkweed. So swamp milkweed particularly is the host plant for monarch butterflies. So we know that monarchs are in decline and they have to be on one of the native milkweeds in order to live. And this person said, I planted milkweed for the monarchs, and these caterpillars, these yellow and black caterpillars, are killing it. They're eating it and killing it. And I've been pulling them off and I don't know what to do. They're killing my milkweed that I planted for the monarchs. And I had to take a deep breath. And I was like, those are monarch caterpillars. And I don't think people realize when we talk about host plants for our beneficial insects, a lot of what we're talking about is the plant that the caterpillar needs to eat in order to turn into a butterfly. And most species of butterfly and moth are specialists, and they can only eat very specific plants. And I kind of always joke, it's like, if you don't love your caterpillars, then you're never going to get your butterflies, right? And they do. They're voracious eaters. That's all they're meant to do. And they can absolutely decimate plants, but that's what they're designed for. Our swallowtail butterflies locally eat of the Apiaceae family. So that's like your carrots and parsleys and things like that. So if you're like, oh no, something's eating all my carrots, like, it's probably swallowtail butterfly caterpillars. I tend to plant fennel. I don't like fennel at all, but I plant it and I put all of my swallowtail caterpillars on it and let them go to town on it. So yeah, so finding kind of some host plants of your favorite butterflies, I think it's a great idea. Fennel, Brown's fennel in particular being one of them. Yeah, but yeah, if I could pick one, goldenrod's probably up there for me. That's a long answer to your question.
That's good.
Anything else? Awesome. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording. Thank you, everyone who is hopefully watching this later. And let's go ahead and end our recording.